The chandeliers above glittered like captured stars, casting golden light across the Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom. Every corner gleamed, from the polished marble floor to the towering arrangements of white roses perfumed with quiet opulence. 300 of New York's finest sat in hushed conversation, the rustle of silk gowns and the clink of crystal glasses, blending with the soft strains of a string quartet. It was the sort of scene meant to be immortalized in magazines, whispered about in boardrooms, envied by anyone who had ever dreamed of being close to power. At the center of it all stood Nathan Blake, 52 years old, commanding yet distinguished. He carried himself with the air of a man who had clawed his way to the top and earned every polished button of his Italian tuxedo. His salt-tan pepper hair was swept back with precision, his jaw set with confidence. Those piercing blue eyes had studied balance sheets, contracts, and adversaries across conference tables, and now they fixed themselves upon the double doors at the far end of the aisle. Any moment, they would open to reveal the woman who, by all appearances, would complete the perfect picture of his life. Victoria Reynolds. She came from old money, a name that carried weight in society, beautiful in a polished, practiced way. She embodied the sort of sophistication that would anchor Nathan's new chapter. He had built empires from nothing. She would bring heritage and stability. She was everything the world expected him to marry, and he took comfort in that symmetry. As the minister's voice rose, solemn and clear, Nathan let his chest swell with satisfaction. This was the culmination of decades of relentless ambition, and yet something beneath the surface itched at him, a quiet unease. It whispered like static at the edges of his thoughts, subtle but persistent. He told himself it was only wedding nerves, the natural gravity of a day that marked the closing of one life and the opening of another. Still, it nagged at him. The guests leaned forward as the ornate doors creaked open. A hush fell across the room, and then a collective sigh of approval followed Victoria's entrance. Draped in liquid silk that shimmered with every step, her gown clung with designer precision, her diamond earrings scattering shards of light. She glided down the pearl white runner on her father's arm, her smile a mask of flawless serenity. Cameras flashed, guests whispered in admiration, and Nathan felt the small twist of unease sink deeper. Buried under the tidal wave of approval surrounding him, everything looked as it should. The minister began. His words echoed through the vast room, weighty and ceremonial. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Nathan Blake and Victoria Reynolds." And then the universe cracked. The ballroom doors slammed open with a thunderous bang that silenced the quartet mid-note. The sudden sound ricocheted off marble and crystal, scattering whispers into shocked gasps. Every head turned as a small figure darted into the golden light, her shoes striking the floor in sharp, rapid beats. It was not a late guest or a frantic servant. It was a child, a girl of no more than 7, her yellow dress simple, homemade. It seemed straining against the opulent backdrop. Her dark hair was braided neatly, and her brown eyes burned with determination that seemed far too grown for her small frame. She clutched a tiny purse to her side as she marched down the center aisle, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Inside the stunned silence, the crowd murmured in confusion, some chuckling nervously, others scandalized by the intrusion. Victoria's perfect smile faltered, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Nathan's eyes narrowed in disbelief as recognition dawned. Emma Turner, the quiet daughter of his housekeeper, Lucy. He had seen her often, sitting silently in the corner of his study, coloring in her books while her mother worked. Harmless, invisible, now she stood before him, her small chest rising and falling as she drew in a breath that seemed to fill the entire ballroom. Her voice rang out, high and clear, carrying to every corner of the room with the conviction of a truth no one could ignore. "Excuse me," she said, her words slicing through the silence. "Excuse me, but this wedding is a trap." The collective gasp from 300 guests was like a rush of wind, sweeping across the room in disbelief. Crystal glasses rattled on their stems. Victoria's face blanched, her lips parting, but no sound emerging. Nathan felt his smile vanish, the unease that had nagged at him all morning exploding into a thunderclap of dread. The world held its breath. A child had just stopped the wedding of the century. Under the stunned silence of the ballroom, the weight of Emma Turner's words seemed to press down on everyone present. Guests exchanged shocked glances, pearls clutched, programs dropped. Victoria's carefully painted smile fractured into something sharp, her knuckles white around the bouquet as though holding it tighter might keep her world from unraveling. The minister stood frozen, his solemn script forgotten. While the string quartet stared at their instruments, unsure whether to play or flee, Nathan Blake felt his entire chest tighten. For a man who had built an empire by mastering chaos, this was different. This was personal, raw, unplanned, and the worst part, the flicker in his gut, the one he had dismissed as nerves, roared to life. He looked down at the little girl standing, no higher than his waist, her dark braids neat, her yellow dress trembling faintly with the rise and fall of her small breaths. Emma's eyes were steady, however, brown and unblinking, carrying a clarity that none of the adults in that glittering room possessed. Victoria found her voice first. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, her tone sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence. Security removed her immediately. The guards moved from the back of the room, their polished shoes echoing against marble. But Nathan lifted a hand. His instincts, the same instincts that had saved him in boardrooms filled with sharks, flared. He had learned never to ignore them. His voice, calm but commanding, rang out across the ballroom. "Wait." The word cut the air like a blade. The guards froze. Victoria's head whipped toward him, her perfect mask cracking into incredulous outrage. "Nathan, this is absurd. She's a child. She is my housekeeper's daughter," Nathan interrupted, his eyes never leaving Emma. "And she looks like she has something to say." The murmurs in the room swelled. Some guests scandalized, others riveted. Emma, though visibly shaking, took a step forward until she stood directly in front of the altar, dwarfed by the towering presence of Nathan Blake and the gleaming luxury surrounding them. She opened the small purse she carried, a child's accessory no one had thought to search, and pulled out something that looked so out of place in the grand ballroom that even Nathan felt a jolt. Out a plastic pink camera, Emma's voice, steady despite the tremor in her hands, rose again. "I took pictures," she said simply. "Like the detectives on TV. I saw them switch your papers." The lady in the pretty dress and the man with the mean eyes. The crowd gasped again, louder this time, as if the very walls had leaned in to listen. Victoria's face drained of color. She let out a brittle laugh, the high-pitched, the practiced. "Oh, Nathan, you can't possibly—" "Quiet," Nathan snapped, his voice suddenly carrying the same edge that had silenced ruthless competitors across the East Coast. He crouched, his tuxedo straining at the seams, and lowered himself to Emma's level. The entire room seemed to lean with him. "What papers, Emma?" His voice was gentler now, coaxing, but underneath it lay the weight of a man on the verge of discovering something catastrophic. Emma extended the camera with both hands, her fingers trembling. "The ones in your study, the ones in the safe. I saw her and the mean man switch them. They thought nobody was watching." Nathan's fingers brushed against the cheap plastic, and for the first time in years, his hands shook. He powered on the camera. The screen flickered to life, and there, in grainy frames from a child's perspective, appeared the images. Victoria near his safe, a tall, stern man with hungry eyes, papers being exchanged, the very documents he had locked away, entrusted only to her. Gasps became a roar of disbelief as Nathan's blue eyes hardened. He looked up slowly, his gaze finding Victoria's. The practiced perfection of her face was gone, replaced with a raw, cornered fury. "This is madness," she cried, voice rising, cracking. "You are going to believe the fantasies of a 7-year-old over me?" But Emma was not finished. She clutched Nathan's sleeve, tugging gently until he looked back at her. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, but in the silence of the room, it carried like a thunderclap. "He calls her partner, not like married. Partners like business partners." She laughed differently when you weren't there. The words pierced deeper than any document, any photo. They were the raw, unfiltered truth of a child who had watched when adults thought she was invisible. And Nathan, man who had built towers of glass and steel, who had measured his life in contracts and stock prices, felt something inside him shatter. Children, he thought. See what adults pretend not to. Victoria's bouquet slipped from her hands, white roses scattering across the marble like bones for the first time in years. Nathan Blake, untouchable billionaire, master of his empire, felt fear, not for himself, but for the quiet little girl in the yellow dress who had just declared war on a world of masks. A lie's dot, and somewhere deep in his chest, a truth he had ignored, the long pressed against his ribs, demanding to be heard. The wedding of the century had just turned into the beginning of something far more dangerous. The ballroom emptied in fragments, like a glass shattering in slow motion. Guests murmured in clusters as they drifted toward the exit, some outraged, others thrilled by the scandal they would retell over champagne. What was supposed to be the wedding of the century had dissolved into chaos, and at the center of it all stood Nathan Blake, gripping a child's toy camera as if it were dynamite. Victoria had been escorted out, her protests echoing down the gilded corridors until the heavy doors shut behind her. Nathan could still hear them in his mind, shrill and desperate. "You're destroying everything. Don't listen to her, she's a child." But it wasn't her voice that haunted him now. It was Emma's, calm, clear, and frighteningly certain. She laughed differently when you weren't there. Nathan remained frozen at the altar long after the guests had gone, staring at the blurry images that told a story his heart already knew was true. He had built his empire on instincts sharper than knives, on reading men who smiled while plotting to gut him. And now, when it mattered most, he realized he had nearly ignored the one voice that mattered, the voice of a little girl in a yellow dress. That night, in the quiet of his penthouse, Nathan replayed the photographs over and over. Victoria's face bent over his safe, the stranger with the predator's eyes, briefcase open, the subtle exchange of papers. He didn't recognize the man, but the look in his eyes was familiar, the look of a wolf circling prey. He poured himself a drink, but his hand shook so badly the crystal glass rattled against the bar. He didn't drink it. He simply stared out across the city lights, the glittering skyline that was supposed to be his kingdom. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he had built it on sand. Meanwhile, across the city in a cramped apartment in Queens, Emma sat cross-legged on the couch beside her mother. Lucy Turner clutched a cardboard box, the severance pay the head housekeeper had handed her that afternoon. Eyes averted, voice apologetic. 2 weeks' salary for 3 years of loyalty. Victoria's reach, it seemed, still lingered in the mansion even after Nathan had stopped the wedding. Lucy tried to be strong, but Emma could feel the weight of it pressing on her. Her mother's hands trembled as she sorted through unopened bills stacked on the coffee table, the word final notice screaming in red across the envelopes. Emma laid her small hand over her mother's. "It's okay, Mommy. I did what Daddy said. I told the truth." Lucy's throat tightened. She pulled her daughter close, burying her face in Emma's hair. "Oh, sweetheart, sometimes telling the truth costs more than staying quiet." Emma pulled back just enough to look at her with those serious brown eyes. "The princess always saves the kingdom, even if the dragon is scary." Lucy broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks, silent, unstoppable. Her little girl had walked into a ballroom full of power and silenced it with 7 words. She should have been in school drawing butterflies, not testifying against wolves in silk dresses. But even as Lucy wept, across town Nathan's instincts told him Emma had barely scratched the surface. His empire was under attack from forces larger than a deceitful fiancé. Something in those photos whispered of strategy, of coordination, of a conspiracy crafted with surgical precision. At 2 a.m, unable to silence his thoughts, Nathan pulled out files from his study, contracts, acquisition agreements, joint ventures. He had signed them with confidence. But tonight the pages looked different under his weary eyes. Numbers didn't add up. Clauses seemed subtly altered. A trail of quiet manipulation threaded through his empire like cracks in glass. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He opened it and felt his blood run cold. A single line glared back at him. "The child sees too much." For the first time in years, Nathan felt fear, not for his empire, but for someone else, for a little girl who should have been invisible to the predators circling him. At that same moment, Emma sat at the kitchen table in her apartment, her crayons scattered around her coloring book. But she wasn't drawing princesses or castles anymore. She was sketching a black car parked outside their building, its windows tinted, its headlights like the eyes of wolves waiting in the dark. She pressed the brown crayon hard into the paper, harder than she meant to, until it snapped in two. She didn't say anything to her mother, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep on the couch. She just kept drawing, because Emma Turner had learned something most adults never did sometimes. The truth wasn't enough to stop the monsters. Sometimes you had to watch them, memorize them, capture them, even if no one believed you. And as Nathan stared at that chilling text, and Emma sketched the black car outside her home, their lives were already entwined in a way that neither could escape. The wolves had smelled blood, and they were coming closer. The city outside Nathan's penthouse gleamed with its usual arrogance, neon signs, skyscraper windows burning late into the night, traffic moving like veins of fire. But inside his glass fortress, the air was different, heavy, charged. Nathan Hadn't slept in 40 hours. His desk, once immaculate, was buried beneath contracts, financial statements, and surveillance photos delivered by the private investigator he had hired in secret. The threads were coming together, and they were poisonous. 3 contracts all worth millions bore subtle alterations that transferred funds into shell corporations. At first glance, they looked legitimate, but under scrutiny they reeked of forgery. What made Nathan's blood run colder was the pattern. All trails led to Carson Industries, the empire of his fiercest rival, Marcus Carson. Nathan rubbed his temples. He'd fought men like Carson in boardrooms, but this wasn't just a business feud anymore. This was warfare. And the little girl in the yellow dress, had walked straight into the crossfire. His phone vibrated again. Another anonymous message. Some problems require permanent solutions. He froze. The words weren't veiled threats anymore. They were promises. Across town in Queens, Emma stirred awake in the dim light of her small bedroom. She had been dreaming of her father, his badge gleaming under the streetlight as he bent down to her level and said, "Lil' bird, you'll always know when danger is near. Trust your eyes. Trust your gut." She sat up, heart thudding, and went to her window. On the curb across the street, the black sedan was back, same tinted windows, same engine humming low like a predator's growl. But tonight, something was different. Emma squinted through the glass and saw the passenger door crack open. A man stepped out. Her small hand reached for the sketchbook she always kept near her bed. She began to draw furiously, every detail she could see, the scar on his cheek, the way he tapped his phone again and again, the shiny shoes that didn't match his maintenance worker jacket. She remembered what her father had said. The world doesn't always give you cameras, little bird. Sometimes you draw your evidence. In a living room, Lucy Turner coughed in her sleep, unaware of the danger lurking outside. Emma bit her lip, then tiptoed across the apartment, clutching her sketch. She shook her mother gently. "Mommy," she whispered, urgency trembling in her voice. "The car people are back." Lucy sat up, groggy, fear flickering in her tired eyes. She wanted to dismiss it, tell Emma she'd imagined it, but something in her daughter's seriousness silenced her. By sunrise, Nathan's black BMW was parked outside their apartment. He hadn't asked permission. He hadn't given Lucy time to argue. He had brought 3 of his most trusted security agents, and within an hour, Lucy and Emma were being hustled into a safe house on the Upper East Side. "Mr. Blake," Lucy protested as she stood in the sparsely furnished apartment, its walls lined with security monitors. "This isn't necessary. We'll be fine." "No," Nathan said flatly, his voice carrying the steel that had once convinced entire boards to back down. "This isn't about business anymore. They threatened your daughter. They threatened the only person brave enough to speak the truth when I was too blind to see it. You're staying here. Both of you." Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Like witness protection in the movies?" Nathan looked down at her, surprised by her calmness. And for the first time since the chaos began, he allowed a faint smile. Something like that. But the reprieve didn't last. That afternoon, Emma's school principal called. "Mrs. Turner, we had an incident. A man claiming to be Emma's uncle came to pick her up early. When asked for identification, he grew agitated and left." Lucy's hands shook as she recounted the call to Nathan. Before she finished, Emma interrupted with a chilling observation. "He had the same eyes as the mean man who switched your papers, but his hair was yellow this time, fake yellow. The bottom was still dark." Nathan's stomach turned. A 7-year-old had spotted a disguise his trained guards would have missed. That night, as the city hummed beyond the windows of the safe house, the next attack came. Lucy had let Emma's orange tabby, Whiskers, out to play in the courtyard. Minutes later, he was gone. The security footage showed a man in a maintenance uniform walking away with a carrier. His face turned just out of range of the cameras. "Maintenance people don't look lost," Emma said, studying the footage as if she were an adult detective. "He kept looking around like he didn't belong, and he checked his phone too much, like the car people do." Nathan stared at her, a mixture of awe and fear tightening his chest. She wasn't just observant, she was methodical. And now the predators were circling closer, willing to use even a child's pet to break her courage. The final straw came 2 nights later. Nathan returned from a late meeting to find the apartment door ajar. His security team swept the rooms, weapons drawn. Nothing was stolen, no valuables missing. But Emma's drawings were scattered across the floor, her sketchbook torn open, and The pink camera, the one that had stopped the wedding, was gone. Emma stood in the center of the wreckage, her face pale, but her voice steady. They only took my detective things, not Mommy's jewelry, not your watch, just my things. Nathan's blood ran cold. This wasn't about money, or even about him anymore. They weren't after power or wealth, they were after the truth. The truth that only a 7-year-old child had seen. That night, Emma came to Nathan's study in the safe house, holding a new drawing. She handed it to him silently. It was a picture of him standing at a window, wearing a cape, his arms spread wide as though shielding a small figure behind him. Beneath them, the words in a child's uneven scrawl, "Guardian." Nathan looked at her, his throat tight. "Emma, what does this mean?" She tilted her head, eyes wide with that uncanny seriousness. "Daddy was a guardian before he went to heaven. Now you are. Guardians keep the good people safe from monsters." Outside, a black car rolled slowly past the safe house, headlights cutting like knives through the dark. And for the first time in decades, Nathan Blake, the man who had thought himself untouchable, realized his fortune meant nothing if he couldn't protect a child with braids, a yellow dress, and a truth that made her the most dangerous witness in New York. The safe house, once meant to feel secure, had begun to feel like a glass cage. Every shadow outside its reinforced windows looked like a threat. Every sound in the hallway carried the possibility of intrusion, and every night, Emma Turner, 7 years old, in her yellow pajamas, sat up in bed sketching what she saw, as though her crayons were the only weapon she had against the monsters who stalked her world. Nathan Blake didn't sleep much anymore. The billionaire, who once measured time and profits and losses, now measured it in the breaths of the child he'd sworn to protect. He walked the perimeter of the safe house, checked the locks himself, reviewed the camera feeds with his security team. Yet still, danger seeped in like water through cracks in stone. 3 days after the break-in that stole Emma's camera, the first direct attempt came. Lucy was folding laundry when the fire alarm blared. A shrill, metallic scream ripped through the apartment. The lights flickered red. Sprinklers hissed from the ceiling, spraying water across the living room. The security system showed nothing, but Nathan's instinct screamed. He grabbed Lucy and Emma, forcing them toward the panic room, while his guard swept the hall. That's when Emma tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide, her voice steady even in the chaos. "It's not a fire," she said. "They want us to leave. They want us in the hallway." Nathan froze. He looked at her, this small child dripping from the sprinklers, and realized she was right. He'd fought hostile takeovers, backstabbing, rivals, and saboteurs his entire career, but never had he seen someone unravel a trap so quickly, so clearly. And indeed, the moment his security team opened the stairwell, a shot rang out. The bullet ricocheted off the reinforced doorframe, sparks flying, screams echoed in the building. Somewhere in the stairwell, men were moving, professionals, trained to kill. Back inside, Nathan barked. He shoved Lucy and Emma into the panic room, his heart pounding as steel doors sealed around them. The smell of smoke, manufactured, not real, slid under the cracks. His phone buzzed with a message. "The child doesn't live." Through the week, Lucy sobbed silently, clutching Emma to her chest. But Emma, trembling though she was, whispered, "Wolves blow harder when the little pigs see them." "Daddy said so." Nathan knelt in the cramped panic room, looking into her eyes for the first time. The Empire Builder admitted the truth. "Emma, they're not after me anymore. They're after you." She didn't flinch. She only asked one question. "Then what's the plan?" That night, Nathan met with Samantha Reed, his private investigator. Samantha had pieced together connections between Carson Industries and a string of suspicious marriages. Powerful men ruined, fortunes drained, competitors dismantled. Victoria Reynolds wasn't the first. She was part of a system, and Emma, in her child's innocence, had cracked it open by noticing the details adults ignored. "Carson isn't just using hostile takeovers," Samantha said grimly. "He's using women like Victoria to infiltrate, sabotage, and gut his rivals. You weren't his only target, but Emma is the first witness to see it happen in real time." Nathan's blood went cold. He thought of Emma's drawings scattered on the safe house floor, the missing pink camera, the constant surveillance. Carson wasn't just trying to destroy his empire anymore. Carson was trying to erase the little girl who had seen too much. The second attempt came less subtle, more vicious. Nathan had allowed Emma to attend a short session at Riverside Elementary under heavy guard. to give her a sense of normalcy. At recess, a van pulled up to the playground fence. The side door slid open. A man in a delivery uniform jumped out, his arm outstretched, reaching for a child Emma. Her scream cut the air. Guards tackled the man, pulling Emma back. Children scattered in terror. The man fought like an animal, eyes wild, until a security officer struck him down. His last words before unconsciousness were a hissed warning. "You think you can hide her forever?" Emma shook in Nathan's arms when he arrived, but even through tears, her words chilled him. He smelled like the man with the scar, the one in the car. The threads tightened. The net was closing by the end of that week. Nathan's company stock had plummeted 20%. 3 of his closest partners severed ties overnight. Rumors flooding the market about instability at Blake Industries. It wasn't coincidence. Carson had launched his offensive while Nathan was consumed with Emma's safety. But Emma, sitting at the kitchen table with her crayons, was still fighting. She drew pictures of Carson's offices she had never seen, but remembered from Victoria's phone when she snooped through files. She drew diagrams of who met who carried briefcases, who checked phones. Her walls became an evidence map more detailed than anything Samantha's team had built in months. One evening, as Nathan studied her sketches, Emma said softly, "The wolves aren't just after us. They're after all the castles. They've already blown some down. You just didn't see the pieces." Nathan stared at her, realization dawning. Carson's scheme was larger than he imagined, an empire built on wreckage. Marriages turned into weapons. Emma, in her childlike clarity, had exposed an empire of lies. And now, Nathan knew, only two outcomes remained. Either he found a way to protect Emma and bring Carson down, or the wolves would finally break through the door. The courthouse buzzed like a hive under siege. Camera crews jostled for position. Journalists shouted questions into the wind, and bystanders pressed against barricades, desperate for a glimpse of the spectacle about to unfold. It wasn't just another corporate scandal, it was the trial of the decade. The headlines wrote themselves. Billionaire betrayal, a child witness, empire versus wolves. Inside, the air was heavier, charged with the electric tension of hundreds of eyes fixed on a single room. At the defense table sat Victoria Reynolds, stripped of her designer gowns and diamonds, her beauty sharpened into something brittle by prison orange. Beside her, Marcus Carson radiated fury, his jaw clenched tight, his predatory eyes sweeping the room as if calculating every weakness. Their legal team, a wall of suits worth millions, stacked papers, whispered strategies, and cast sneering glances at the prosecution, and at the center of it all sat Nathan Blake, shoulders squared, face carved into stone. He had been through hostile takeovers, government investigations, and shareholder revolts, but nothing had ever rattled him like the responsibility he carried now. This wasn't about his empire anymore. It was about the little girl who had seen through the lies when he hadn't, the child who was about to walk into the fire. With nothing but crayons, a toy camera, and the truth, the judge entered, stern and formidable. "All rise." The shuffle of feet filled the courtroom before silence fell like a curtain. Then the doors opened, and Emma Turner walked in. She was small, so small against the towering oak doors. The rows of adults staring, the weight of history pressing down on her. Her hair was braided neatly, her yellow dress freshly ironed, but her hands clutched her sketchbook like a shield. A child advocate held her other hand, guiding her to the stand, but Emma never looked away from the rows of eyes upon her. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't hiding. She was ready. The prosecutor, David Chen, approached gently, lowering himself slightly so his tall frame wouldn't loom over her. His voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the courtroom. "Emma, can you tell us what you saw in Mr. Blake's study the day of the wedding?" Emma opened her sketchbook and laid it on the stand. The microphone picked up the faint rustle of paper. Her small finger pointed to a drawing. "Victoria near a safe. A tall man with mean eyes holding a black case." She switched the papers. Emma said matter-of-factly, "He put the real ones in his case, and she left fake ones in the safe. They laughed about it when they thought no one was watching." Her words were simple, but they struck like hammers. The defense lawyer pounced, his voice dripping with condescension. "Emma, you like detective shows, don't you? Isn't it possible that your imagination ran away with you?" Emma's head tilted, the way children do when they don't understand why adults are being foolish. "No. Lying is when you say something that didn't happen. I don't lie." She pointed at another drawing. She laughed differently with him than with Mr. Blake. Daddy said that's how you know people wear masks, the courtroom murmured. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, intrigued by the clarity in Emma's words. Then the prosecutor pulled out the recording. The hush deepened until silence was absolute. Emma's small voice filled the room again, but this time it was the past echoing, the audio she had captured from behind the safe house door. Victoria's voice, cold and sharp, make it look like an accident. Gas leak, maybe another voice. The child sees too much. Victoria again. Grief makes people vulnerable. A widower is easier to control. The words hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's face drained of all color. Carson's jaw flexed, his knuckles white on the defense table. The defense attorney scrambled. Objection, this is inadmissible. It was obtained by, overruled. Judge Hendricks snapped, her voice cutting like a blade. This recording is the voice of the defendant, and it corroborates the testimony. Proceed. Emma sat small and steady, her hands folded in her lap. She had just dropped the weight of an empire onto the courtroom floor. But the defense wasn't finished. They tried to discredit her, pulling every trick from their arsenal. Emma, you're only 7. Do you really understand what contracts and prenuptial agreements are? Emma's reply silenced even the jury. No, but I understand lying. Sneaky things when people think no one's watching, that's lying with actions instead of words. The defense attorney faltered. For all his degrees and his millions, he had just been outmaneuvered by a child's definition of truth. Carson snapped. Unable to contain himself, he slammed a fist on the table, startling even his own lawyers. This is absurd. You're letting a child sit down, Mr. Carson, Judge Hendricks thundered. You'll have 25 years to reconsider how absurd it is when you're in federal prison. The jury deliberated for 97 minutes, one of the shortest in the court's history. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. On all counts. The words rippled through the courtroom. Victoria slumped, her beauty collapsing into ruin. Carson swore under his breath, the sound venomous. And Emma simply picked up her crayons, turned a page in her sketchbook, and began to draw. Nathan watched her, his chest tightening with something he had not felt in decades. Awe. She had walked into a battlefield where men with millions and women with masks had fallen, and she had stood unshaken. The little girl in the yellow dress had done what no boardroom, no lawyer, no billionaire could do. She had spoken the truth, and the truth had won. The verdict still echoed in Nathan's mind like the final gavel had been struck inside his chest. Guilty on all counts. Those words freed his empire, yes, but more than that, they had freed him. For years he had built towers of steel and glass, conquered rivals, and measured his worth by numbers on a stock ticker. Yet, sitting in the courthouse lobby with Emma Turner's small hand resting in his, Nathan realized that none of it mattered. Not the billions, not the power, not even the victory over Carson. What mattered was that a 7-year-old girl, dressed in yellow, had dared to shout the truth when the world was too blind to see it. But as Emma calmly drew in her sketchbook, as though the trial had been just another day in her detective stories, Nathan understood something terrifying. The wolves weren't gone. They'd been caged, but the world was full of more like them, men with sharp smiles, women with perfected masks, corporations that thrived in shadows. Emma had exposed one conspiracy, but she had also lit a fire that would draw every moth with malicious intent. 2 weeks later, that fire blazed higher than Nathan could have imagined. The media couldn't let her go. The New York Times called her the yellow dress detective. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Emma the Truth Teller. Hashtag Lil Eyes Big Truth. Hashtag David vs. Goliath. Parent blogs shared her story as a rallying cry for listening to children. Editorial cartoons sketched her as a tiny figure standing against wolves in suits. Every city magazine wanted an interview. Every talk show wanted her on their couch. Lucy tried to shield her daughter, but Emma, calm beyond her years, told her mother, "It's okay, Mommy. People need to see what truth looks like. When it's little, maybe it makes them less scared to tell their own truth." Nathan heard those words and knew he couldn't let her voice become just a headline. He couldn't let her courage be swallowed by the endless hunger of the news cycle. It had to become something lasting. And so the Clear Eyes Foundation was born. It started with a simple idea. Children, with their uncluttered honesty, would sit in on corporate ethics boards. Their job wasn't to calculate profits or legal risks, but to ask the questions adults ignored. Is this fair? Would this hurt people? Would I want to explain this to a child? His board thought he'd lost his mind. Children cannot advise on billion-dollar contracts, one executive argued. Nathan held up Emma's sketch from that night in the safe house, the one where she had drawn him as a guardian. Keep flowing, arms shielding her from monsters. His voice was iron. This drawing saved my life, and possibly this company. If a 7-year-old can see the cracks in a billion-dollar con, she can see the cracks in our morals. And if we can't pass the test of a child's fairness, we don't deserve to pass at all. The world thought it would fail. Instead, profits soared. Employees rallied to a company that placed integrity above greed. Customers trusted Blake Industries more than ever. Competitors were forced to take notice. The Clear Eyes Foundation spread to other corporations, first cautiously, then eagerly, and Emma became its heart. She didn't want interviews or fame. What she wanted was crayons, blank paper, and children who needed someone to listen to them. Her art programs for inner city schools gave kids the same outlet she had used to survive, the chance to draw their truth, to see that their voice is mattered. Nathan watched in awe as classrooms filled with murals, neighborhoods not as they were, but as the children dreamed they could be. Still, one night, as he walked through the Blake mansion now transformed into a weekend community center, Nathan paused in the old study, the place where Emma had first hidden under his desk and witnessed betrayal. She was there, teaching other children how to sketch what they saw. He leaned against the doorway and just listened. Bad people forget to stay the same when different people are watching. Emma told the children softly, her braids shining in the lamplight. Good people don't change like that. That's how you tell the difference. Nathan's chest tightened. That single line, so simple, cut deeper than any corporate training program ever had. He realized then that Emma wasn't just a witness anymore. She was a teacher, a prophet in braids and yellow dresses, guiding a world that had lost its way back to something pure. But it wasn't until her art exhibition, 2 years later, that Nathan understood the full measure of what she had become. The Metropolitan Community Art Center brimmed with people, families, executives, activists, journalists. On the walls hung dozens of Emma's drawings, now paintings bright, bold strokes that told stories no adult had dared to tell. A child pointing at a wolf in sheep's clothing. A courtroom where truth sat tall with scales in its hands. A little girl standing in a church aisle, wings unfurled, light radiating from her form as giants loomed around her. Above the door, in careful handwriting, the title of the exhibition, What Adults Don't See. Emma stepped onto the stage, 9 years old now, her voice carrying with calm assurance. My daddy used to tell me truth is like sunlight. It makes some people warm, and it makes other people hide. But sunlight always wins, because darkness can't stay where light shines. Nathan stood in the front row, his eyes burning. She didn't just save him anymore. She was saving them all. When the speech ended, Emma guided him to a painting at the back wall. 3 figures, a tall man, a woman with kind eyes, and a small girl, all walking hand in hand toward a horizon full of flowers. Is that us? Nathan whispered, his throat tight. Emma nodded, smiling softly. It's my family. The one the bad people couldn't break. You, me, mommy, because families are braver together. And in that moment, Nathan Blake, billionaire, empire builder, conqueror of rivals, knew his greatest fortune wasn't the skyscrapers he'd built or the millions he'd earned. It was the little girl who had once shouted in a ballroom, "Excuse me, but this wedding is a trap," because she hadn't just saved his life. She had given him back his soul.